So the Big Ten is really top heavy. Penn State, Ohio State, and I think if Oregon figures out that fifth, sixth gear, they're a second half team. They might peak at the right time going into the postseason because we want to talk about consistency and continuity with Penn State. You have Will Stein back because, you're not breaking in a new offense. You're just breaking in a new quarterback, running back, majority of the offensive line. Wide receivers, Evan Stewart, unfortunately, out for the season.
Yeah,
it's
just that.
But that's still offensively a gifted team. They just need to gel at some point. The same thing with Ohio State. New quarterback, new offensive coordinator, right? Brian Hartline, first time OC. I know he's been there for a long time, but they held off on him for a while.
He's never been a play caller before, Zach.
Yeah,
has not done it. It's one of the reasons I think they lose to Texas in week 1.
Yes.
Am I supposed to pretend like Brian Hartline? I mean, maybe he is going to be that good. You tell me he's going to be at his peak as an OC, which he can totally be good at, of course. He's going to be at his peak just firing on all cylinders right away, immediately. There's going to be no growth, no development, no progression.
Quarterback?
With a brand new quarterback, yeah, who's never played college football before. Like I'm supposed to believe that? I don't believe that.
So there's going to be growing pains with Oregon, with Ohio State, but these teams are still really good. It's their ceiling. They're not going to reach their ceiling, I don't think, until towards the end of the season. And then can you withstand how tough a Big Ten conference is now to a point where, okay, you can go 10-2 and not miss the playoff, because that's the thing. Those teams that don't withstand those 12-game schedules. But, I mean, that's besides the point. I'm not trying to imply that Ohio State and Oregon don't make the college football playoff, but we've seen some of the better teams never live up to their potential because they don't make it through a long season, whether that's college football or the NFL. So Penn State has all of that consistency, that continuity. There's the only chemistry that Penn State would need to build is through the passing game. Go figure, once again, because you do lose Tyler Warren and you bring in Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross, Kyron Hudson. You're just going to need to get acclimated, but it's a lot easier to do when it's a third-year starting quarterback, same OC, entire offensive line is back for the most part, 2 superstar running backs. That's why Penn State should be favored to win the Big Ten in the regular season and the Big Ten title. And that's a synopsis of why they'd be better than Ohio State and Oregon. I imagine you agree with me that the Ohio State game is still going to be tougher than the Oregon one, especially where Penn State plays the Ducks. Earlier in the season, like I said, I do not want to play Oregon later on in the season. I'm glad that's game 4 for Penn State and not game 10, for example.
Yeah, game 4 at home off a bye, cross-country trip. That's a lot of advantages in a whiteout game. Although Penn State fans might not like me for this one, I actually, as an Oregon guy, would rather play that game in the whiteout than a big noon kickoff.
Oh, yeah.
I want no part of Oregon's football team kicking off at 9 a.m. Do you know, even if you go a couple days before, your body clock is not all the way adjusted. You're waking up you probably wake up a solid 3 to 4 hours before kickoff because you have to go have your team meal and then you have to bus to the stadium and then you go through warm up. You're probably looking at about 4 hours roughly. So every team does their logistics differently at Southern Utah. I think we're usually awake around 4 hours prior to kickoff. If it's an earlier kick. So I want no part for Oregon to play at 9 a.m. West Coast time. That hasn't gone well for West Coast teams. At least it didn't last year. And I don't. Yeah. So, it's not going to suddenly just, get really easy. But your point on Oregon is a really good one because their talent on their roster is really good. The experience just isn't there. But by the end of the season, when they, go through their tough stretch of November, I think it can be there and they can be a much better team. I mean, you look at, what they did last year. They went from struggling with Idaho and Boise State to in the middle of the year beating the future national champs, and Washington comes into town who it was not as good as Boise State last year but was certainly much better than Idaho, and Oregon beats the crap out of them. So I think that progression is there. I think the coaching staff has taken steps forward with how they approach game planning and game day execution and adjustments and whatnot over the last few years. And it's an interesting contrast with Oregon and Ohio State because they are different, and I think you could make this case readily about Ohio State that, hey, by the time they play Penn State at home, they're going to be a lot better than when they play Texas. I agree.
And they will.
Yeah, I fully agree. I just still think the advantage for Penn State with the coaching staff, with the roster all being there, I think they're going to find a way to get that game done. And I would feel even more confident if it was Penn State, Ohio State in week 2 or something of that nature. But, Ohio State doesn't have a ton of player continuity from last year. They're turning over a lot. They recruited at a high level. This is why. They are turning over both their coordinators. Oregon's returning both of their coordinators. Oregon's going into their 3rd straight season with the same trio: head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator.
Talk about continuity.
That is a rarity. It is a huge rarity, and I would be pretty surprised if it goes to a 4th. I think Will Stein will end up being a head coach in 2026 somewhere. I hope not, because I like him a lot as Oregon's OC. He's really good. But I wonder, the Ducks do at least get 4 games under their belt that they shouldn't have major problems winning to begin the season before they go and play Penn State. How prepared can the staff, that veteran, experienced staff, get this young, talented Oregon team ready, especially Dante Moore, to go to Penn State for their 5th straight game to start the year? We're going to find out. But I think that contrast between the two is fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up. And then you mentioned earlier, other teams that can kind of sneak up on everybody in the Big Ten. Do you remember who my preseason number 4 team is in the Big Ten Conference? Power rankings?
I didn't know there'd be a pop quiz. Well, because they don't. So Penn State doesn't play Illinois, but was it Illinois? Or was
it is indeed the Illinois Fighting Illini.
Fortunately, they don't play them. Maybe in the Big Ten championship. Maybe. I doubt it.
Yeah, and Illinois is my dark horse to make the Big Ten championship game.
Their schedule's just tough.
Dark horse. Their schedule does not work out as favorably as I would like. They do miss Penn State, but they've got Ohio State at home. They've got USC at home. If they can just beat Indiana on the road, and I think they will, you could look up and see Illinois at 10-2, and maybe that's enough to get your way to Indianapolis again this year. But I think the easy one to look at Penn State's schedule and say, boy, that might trip them up, Iowa.
Iowa at Kinnick,
yeah. Iowa at Kinnick is upset special,
especially right before Ohio State.
Yeah, you got to avoid the look-ahead factor. You've got to go on the road, and you're gonna have a hostile environment against a program that has a very high floor, not the ceiling that a Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State have, or some other programs in the Big Ten like USC, Washington, and keep going down the list, but. I think that game has always got upset potential. I feel that way for Oregon too. I think it's one of Oregon's.
That's anybody. That's not.
I sent out a poll to my Locked On Ducks insiders the other day. If I pick Oregon to go 10-2 with a loss at Penn State, who do you think the other loss is going to be? Over 80% of those that responded said Iowa, and the second one was Washington because it's on the road. It's a rivalry game, but Iowa is the one that has people's attention. So. That's one of those games that from a narrative standpoint, Penn State always wins, right? They win the games they should. They lose the games they should. Yeah, exactly. They'll be favored in that game. So I do think they're going to find a way to win, and they just have more overall talent. I'm going to wait and see on Mark Gronowski. FCS to FBS jumps can go really well. They can go really poorly. And I don't quite know. I haven't checked out enough Gronowski film to feel strongly one way or the other. But frankly, with FCS game tape, it's really tough. It's
so top heavy. You can't get a good margin of how good is this guy in comparison to the competition.
Yeah, I call a lot of FCS football games every year for Southern Utah, and it's not that it isn't good, exciting, fun football that fans enjoy. It absolutely is. To say that walking by an FCS team as someone who's a 5'8.5" play-by-play announcer and podcaster feels the same as walking by a Big Ten team, nope. Those two things are not the same. This is just a majorly different caliber of athlete that that you're dealing with. So I think the Iowa game is the one that stands out as like, if Penn State were to get tripped up where they shouldn't, that would be the one. But I'm sticking to my guns here, Seyko. I'm 12-0.
They're favored against everybody except Ohio State. So if you're going off of that measure, then Penn State's going to go at least 11.
Do we have an Ohio State line?
Thought it was 3.5, 4.5, depending on where you look. So it's in that ballpark. Hey, that's within a
Free
touchdown.
Money.
So
Free money. That's what I call. That's what I call that right there.